Mr. James Tripp. How the devil are you?
Hey, Jamie, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm well, thanks. Good to see you, man.
Good to have you here. There's something particular I want to ask you about, but I'm not going to dive into it straight away. We were just talking before about having the opportunity to catch up on Stephen Gilligan's training and spend some time exploring some different things. And I was kind of thinking back to when we first met. And I don't know if this is the first time we met, but I do remember you coming and doing a talk for my NLP practice group in Letchworth Garden City in Hertfordshire, which would probably have been at least 15 years ago, if not
I'm
more.
going to say probably 2008, 2009, somewhere in there.
Right,
Not,
right.
not a lot longer after that, I wouldn't have thought.
Yeah, yeah. I remember you coming to that. And I remember you saying to me at the time, because I really looked up to you at the time. You were like the model of the NLP trainer. You were the archetype of UK
Right.
NLP trainer that I wanted to be at the time. And I remember you saying to me at the time, put at least as much investment into your business skills as you do your NLP skills and all of that kind of thing. I always remember you saying that. And I've never done that. I probably should have done that. Was probably really good advice, but I've never quite done that because it's never had that kind of same irrational passion. But you at the time, you were an NLP trainer, 100% NLP trainer. That was your thing. That was your shtick. And I remember being quite surprised, I suppose, when you did your event. I think The Secret's So Great, Where's My Ferrari? I remember you doing
Yeah.
that. Where was that? Was that the Renaissance?
That was in London at Heathrow.
Yeah, I think it was the
That
Renaissance Hotel.
May, June 2010.
Right, right. I remember you doing that event, and I went along to that event. I really loved it. But I was kind of like, oh, you know, Jamie's not doing NLP anymore. I can't think if that's the event where you made that announcement, but you shifted radically what you were doing, it seemed, at that point.
It was a major milestone in that shift. So I had a realization in June 2009 that I was changing direction. And I
Right.
started making the change from that day. Literally called up my office and said, there's principles for psychology. We're changing direction. But then the Ferrari event a year later really was sort of like the big coming out party.
Right, right. It was kind of a shock for me, because did that kind of archetypal. You were the archetype. You were the guy. You were like,
Right.
I want that guy's business. I'm going to build that guy's business. And then you were walking away from it. And Salad was a pretty. I mean, it seemed to me, looking from the outside, it looked like a pretty successful venture.
Mhm.
Your NLP training company, and you just sold it, walked away from it, and
Yeah.
started all over again.
And I got to say, just as a kind of jumping off point, that piece of advice that I gave you like 17 years ago of put as much effort into your business skills as into the stuff you're passionate about. I'm not convinced that was great advice. It seemed relevant to me at the time,
Right.
but what I've discovered over the time since then
Yeah.
is that I have an even greater trust in our passions and enthusiasms and a greater than ever respect for finding your unique way of doing it. Like, I
Right.
think we live in a world where, and funnily enough, that actually started coming quite quickly once I started having insights in 2009 about how our experience is created and who we really are and that sort of thing. And we live in a world, James, where everyone and their neighbor is selling one flavor of how to or another. This is how you do it. This is how, and that's great for stuff like how to fix a Kawasaki 250 or how to build a gazebo in your garden or how to X, Y, and Z. But when it comes to finding the best way to express your unique gifts in the world and do the work you care about, obviously there are great people we can learn from. But I think that how you share and take what you're doing into the world is it's very bound up with what you love to do and what you care about and what you're passionate about. And while I've learned all kinds of stuff about business over the years, and that's been very valuable to me, I'd say the even more valuable lesson has been, it's funny, one of my favorite quotes is by Steve Jobs, obviously co-founder of Apple and creator of one of the most successful companies in history. And he said, this was from his commencement speech to the graduating class of, I think it was Stanford. And he said, above all, have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. Everything else is secondary. And you strike me as someone who's been following his heart and his intuition, his passion and his enthusiasm, rather than trying to fit yourself into someone else's how-to or prescriptive model.
Well, Jamie, that's interesting you would say that, because I think that's half true.
Mm.
And
That's about the best I hope for these days.
Right. But I think if it were fully true, I would actually be in a better place now. So speaking personally, I've gone through this, this toggling in between, just let go and connect in and be what I call non-linear in my engagement with things, versus getting strategic and tactical and doing the things that I quote unquote should be doing that are supposed to do this and that. And, I've been in and out and in and out and in and out. And slowly with each iteration, I get closer to being free.
Well, and me too, but I think in a way, that's the yoga of have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition, because we've got ego, conditioning, personality, whatever, yelling at us that there's this way you're supposed to do it, or you're supposed to do it like the experts say, or X, Y, and Z. And then we've got that nudge, that urge, that guidance from within, from our hearts, telling us to go a way that by definition is going to kind of go against conditioning to some degree, against what other people are saying. And so the having the courage to do it is about being able, to sort the wheat from the chaff in all of that, and then take those leaps of faith and those steps forward when it sometimes seems crazy or like a bad idea or whatever it might be. So I think the idea of it being iterative, I think that's everyone. I don't think it's just you, brother.
Right. In fact, I encountered something. I think it was in a book called The Tao of Psychology that I half
I never
read.
heard of it.
Have you not? It's somewhere up there. But
who's it by?
Do you know what, Jamie? I wish I could tell you. I used to remember the title.
No.
I will find it. It's quite an old book, actually. It's not like a particularly recent book. I think it's written back in the 70s. But it had an idea, it had a concept in there, which is allegedly from Jung, which is the circumambulation of the self, right? And actually, this kind of leads on to what I wanted to ask you, coincidentally. Now, Jung had this idea that our self is not any kind of ego state or anything like this. Our self, our deeper self, is something ineffable. It's beyond words or before words. And that maybe our ego across life, part of a developmental path is that our ego will circumambulate this self, kind of move around it, orbit it, and sometimes get closer and sometimes further from it. Will never become identical with. So the ego can never be the self. But you can kind of go around it and around it. And every time you touch it, you can be enriched by it. You can have new life come into you from it. And your ego, I suppose, can mature as a result to become more resonant and congruent with yourself. But I love that circumambulation thing, that sort of wandering around the truth, so to speak, and getting close to it and getting nourished by it, but not ever, getting that kind of perfect identity where you can get that left hemisphere. Oh, yes, we've got this identification now. That really spoke to me. And I guess that's what you're talking about there with that kind of oscillation, that in and out.
Yeah, I love it.
That segues neatly into something I wanted to, the reason I thought to have you come on here, aside from the fact that I had a thoroughly splendid time conversing with you over the Stephen Gilligan training for those few days. I don't know, I'll lose dates. I think this was probably about 2013, maybe 2014, 2013. I did a few one-to-one sessions with you that was off the back of an event that you'd done down in London. We had some conversations. We were on the phone. I was in my office and I was talking to you and I was saying something. Oh, I think this, I think that, I don't know. And you said to me, I get the sense that something else is going on here, something deeper. And I'm like, okay, well, what? And you said to me, I get the sense that you're processing some kind of risk in showing up as who you really are. Right? I think this is what you said to me at the time,
Mm.
something along those lines. And my first thought, my thinking, rational brain went, no, I don't think so. But then I kind of checked in with my felt sense and thought, how would it be to show up as who I really am? And I had a lurch of fear come up in that moment at the idea of showing up as who I really am. Now, the thing is, that lurch of fear and the who I really am, I didn't know who I really was in any conscious left hemisphere way. I couldn't say, well, here's who I really am. But it was just that kind of visceral fear, showing up as who you really are. Now, what I wanted to talk to you about is who you really are. Because it's not the only time I've heard you make reference to who you really are.
Mm.
And it kind of fits with what we're talking about here, the business strategy versus, I guess, showing up as who you really are, engaging with the world, creating with the world as who you really are. And I know that this is a done question. If I go, so Jamie, could you tell me the 5 things, the 5 aspects of who you really are or whatever, but what does that mean to you, who you really are? What does it mean to you?
Yeah. Well, I can hit it from a bunch of different directions. You mentioned Jung earlier, and Jung, among his many contributions, came up with the term the noetic sense,
Mm.
which is the sense of knowing something even more deeply and knowing something to be true even more fully than you could know with empirical data, like from, a microscope or a telescope or a ruler or whatever.
Mm.
And so I'm going to start with a proper hippie quote, which is my bastardization of a quote by Teilhard de Chardin. Should probably be familiar with it, but my bastardization goes like this: that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're one spiritual being having 8 billion human experiences. And who you really are is that one spiritual being. Who you really are is consciousness itself. Now, how do you know who you really are? Well, the knowing of who you are is a feeling, the feeling of remembering the truth of your being, that consciousness, which is kind of the meditative state that all meditation practices are pointing people towards. And so there's a feeling that comes with remembering who you really are that people often describe as kind of coming home or waking up, or we've got different names for it. But it seems to me that each of us, like before we even come out of our mother's wombs, we have that felt sense of who we really are. And then we come out into the world, and in very short order, we get told who we are. And by about 18 months, we start constructing an image of who we are. And then what happens, James, and you'll probably, this will be super obvious to you, like there's a quality of consciousness which the consciousness researchers, neurologists or whatever, refer to as transparency, which is if you look at something that you identify with for any period of time, the nature of consciousness is to inhabit that's which we look at. So we've all had the experience of you're watching a movie and you're 20 minutes in and the hero's doing this and that, and something's about to bump the hero on the head and you go, oh, because you've identified into that image. Well, we've all, like I'm sitting here on Zoom with you, right? And I can see your image on the screen and I can see my image on the screen, and I could, pick both of us out of a police lineup, and I look at that image of me and I go, yeah, that's me. That's the face I saw in the mirror. That's definitely me. But there's a psychology experiment called the Rouge test, where they take little kids under the age of 18 months and they pop them in front of a mirror that's, and the kid starts looking behind the mirror to see where the baby is, right? And they'll cover the mirror and then they'll put a blotch of rouge on the kid's face. And the kid's entirely unresponsive until around about 18 months when the kid starts going, oh, well, that's me. So the kid learns to they learn to identify with the image of themselves from a third person perspective, which is what a mirror image is. Mm. And they get the message, oh, that's me. I'm that third person view of this body and that sort of thing. But that's not who they've been to themselves up to 18 months. Up to 18 months, they inhabit a first person world. They have not identified with an image of self. So that another word for that image is what we might call the ego, which is just a game plan for operating in the world, or we might call it a personality or whatever. But the game of life as I see it is to, step one, remember who you really are. And then step two, start kind of softening the ego and softening the personality and bringing it into line with who you really are. So the ego or personality or whatever can operate in support of bringing who we really are and our deepest gifts to life. So when Jung talks about the circumambulation of the self, which I love, that process of circumambulating it seems to me to kind of knock off the Jung, like you'll know yourself from having met me early in the game, 2008, 2009, whatever. I'm still the same guy I was back then, right? But I'm kind of not as spiky, not as abrasive. There's a lot of the rougher edges of being knocked off as a result of just understanding who I am and how my experience is being created. And I mean, I enjoy life more, so I've got less to gripe about and that sort of thing. So big chunk question, who you really are, consciousness. Smaller chunk question, it seems to me that, and to take a step back, my assertion is that that everything in the universe is one energy. So there's this formless intelligence, you could say, that infuses and composes every aspect of what we refer to as reality. And there's a spark of that intelligence at the heart of each one of us. So I'll give you a quick metaphor for it, then I'll shut up. So you and I are both sitting on chairs, and I wouldn't be surprised if some of the people listening are sitting on chairs or standing on the ground or whatever. And each of us is held in place by the force of gravity. Mm. And each of us have a deep embodied understanding of gravity that we've developed early in our lives. We use it thousands of times each day without even thinking about it. Now, gravity is a non-local principle. It's everywhere in the known universe all at once. Yeah. But it acts on me very locally. My experience of gravity is entirely local. So it seems to me that there's this non-local energy behind life, which is formless. You can't see it or clock it in a microscope, but each of us have the local instantiation of that formless energy at the heart of our being. So and it's unique for each one of us, it's the unique spark of universal consciousness that resides at the heart of each of us. And so when Steve Jobs says, above all, have the courage to follow your heart and your intuition, they somehow already know what you truly want to become. As I hear it, what he's saying is that spark of consciousness within you already knows about the future and life and the journey you're on. And our personality, our ego, our conditioning knows about the past and the world we've known, but it doesn't know about the future. So it just projects the past onto the future. So that's how I see it in a nutshell.
Right. Right. It's kind of interesting. What's coming up in my mind as you're saying that is, I remember going on an event that was a Michael Neal event. This is way back as well, probably around about 2013, 2012, 2013. And he was doing it with somebody else. I can't think who it was. And my memory is shot these days. Probably shouldn't say that. I'm just reaffirming it. But there we go. It's liberating. Who needs memory? It's overrated. But we were in this session. At the time, I was pretty much I saw myself as an atheist. I'd always basically been raised as an atheist. And if somebody said now, James, are you an atheist? I'm like, I'm not going to say yes. I'm not going to say no. It doesn't seem like a term that I want to play the binary around, atheist, not atheist. But at the time, I very much saw myself as an atheist. And the topic of spirituality came up. And we were sent off in pairs to talk about spirituality. And at the time, I had no point of reference for spirituality. It's just like, I don't really know what this means. It doesn't mean anything to me. Like, it doesn't intellectually mean much to me. It doesn't, in an embodied sense, mean much to me. And we got sent off in pairs to discuss spirituality. And I was partnered up with someone. And this lady was telling me all about her angel healing work and all this kind of thing and how that fitted in with her spirituality. And then it was my turn. And I said, I really don't know what to say about this because it doesn't mean that much. I said, essentially, I'm an atheist. And the shock on her face when I said it was like I'd said I was a rapist or something. It was like she was horrified that I would be an atheist.
Right.
But I really meant it. It meant nothing to me, literally nothing. I had no point of reference at all. But I kind of do now. And I wouldn't say that means that I'm a believer in any kind of traditions or anything like this. And I don't want to say anything like, oh, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual, man, or anything like that. But what kind of resonates from what you were saying is, for me, I have a very simple definition of the spiritual or what is spiritual, which is just simply the sense of something greater than ourselves that we are a part of. Now you might, people could go, well, no, that's not really a part of, it's identical to, it's one with, it's all of this, but without getting too much into that kind of slicing and dicing. It's just this sense that there's something greater there that I'm a part of. And I know for me, and the reason I'm saying this is because the name of this podcast is Agents of Everything, right? And there's a thing about
Great
agency, right? I liked it. It came to me in a rant. I was ranting at one point, going, I didn't get into this stuff to be an agent of change in a room. I got into it to be an agent of change in the world, an agent of everything. And that's where Agent of Everything came from. Now, I'm aware with Agents of Everything, there's this kind of like, well, if you are the agent, there's almost like an idea of separateness in that, and you are acting upon things and making things happen and all of this. But I'm aware also that, like, people listening to this are sort of oftentimes into the practical, the pragmatic. How do we make things happen? How do we create better in our lives? How do we? And to me, like, I would definitely have seen the spiritual and the practical as being kind of like, well, different things. They're different things. That's all fine. That's one realm of chin stroking and all of that. But like, what about getting stuff done? What about making things happen? What about bringing things into the world that weren't there before? Difference making, all of that. And some people might say, well, that's just ego that wants to do that. I don't know. I guess for me, though, what I'm getting to here, and I'm not going to say much about my perspectives on this. I do have perspectives, but there's also a pragmatism to letting go of that sense of being an entirely separate individual that acts upon the world and is acted upon by the world, and getting into like having that shift of knowing I don't need to control as much I don't need to have my hands on all the dials and levers and be strategizing and micromanaging and all of that. Actually, do you know what? One of the ways I experience life now is if I'm in the world in an appropriate way, it tends to carry me, and that's actually quite a pragmatic thing. It's a nice thing, and it's a pragmatic thing as well. So I'm curious about, for you, because you're a guy that's always created things, made things happen, been doing things, businesses, books, events, these kinds of things. So what's the relationship in this between coming to this realization of who you really are and the world of things and doing things and making things happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I got a couple of thoughts on it right away. And one is just a practical thing. If you're creating things in the world and if it involves both yourself and other people, then as well as the nuts and bolts of it, like, oh, we need, X amount of magnesium or whatever it might be, there's also the psychological component of it. And so there's a famous Harvard Business Review article by Kalett, Hirschberg, and Petty, where they interviewed 730 business leaders. It's called something like the relationship between state of mind, how state of mind affects your performance. And they got business leaders to indicate on a kind of chart where they spend, from a state of mind perspective, where they spend most of their time. And it ranged from, despair and depression all the way to euphoria. And it turns out despair and depression aren't a very productive place to spend your time, but neither is euphoria. Euphoria can be a lot of fun, but it's not necessarily super productive. What they found was that those leaders who spent their time principally in the domains of calm, happy, energized, were the most productive, and that carried over to their teams and their organizations as well. And the leaders who spent their time predominantly in frustration, anger, tiredness, and stress sometimes got short-term results, but the medium to long-term results were negative in terms of productivity, and it dispirited their teams. So just at a very pragmatic level, there's a very clear correlation between state of mind and results. And so when I'm working with business leaders and I show them that chart and I get them to evaluate where they are on it, and then I read them the research on it, the question that comes to mind, they go, oh, okay, so you're saying if I was in a better state of mind more of the time, I might get more of the results I want. It's like, yes, that's a good conclusion to come to. So the question then becomes, how do you spend more time in a better state of mind? And the answer to that is going to involve some aspect of what looks to me like a spiritual understanding. Now, I don't need to present it as a spiritual understanding. I tend to present it in, using very simple metaphors that you're familiar with, like a snow globe and other things. I'll give you one of my favorites later. I don't want to keep going on, but the point is, even if we just look at state of mind, there's a very clear correlation between state of mind and results.
Right.
Now, if we look at the bigger game of creativity and productivity and making things happen, it seems to me the issue isn't that, like, if you really understood who you are, you wouldn't want to do anything. I see it the other way around entirely. Like, I love teaching. Like, my favorite thing, I love working with business leaders. I love working with coaches, therapists, and change workers. But bottom line is, I love talking to anyone who's interested in this stuff. Like, I love working with people. Now, that doesn't look like I imagine there's some aspect of that might have been ego-driven initially, and there are probably some aspects of character, like, oh, likes to be in the spotlight and all that sort of thing, and I'm fine with that. But it seems like life has placed the desire for and affinity for teaching in my heart. And then the more I get my shonky conditioning personality and ego out of the way, or rather bring it into alignment with that, the more impactful I am and the more of a difference I can make, and the better a teacher and creator and that sort of thing I am. So I don't think the issue is, if you knew who you really are, you wouldn't want to have any goals or achieve anything or produce anything. That sounds like a dismal vision of humanity. I think it's more like, as you realize more and more who you really are, you become less afraid to express yourself in the world in a way that's fully aligned with that, come what may. And when we look around and we see the people who are willing to step up and be courageous and make a difference and all that sort of thing, it's often people who are letting a sense of mission or truth or being shine brighter than their fears and concerns and that sort of thing.
Right. That's
And that yoga that you and I were talking about, the circumambulation, the iterative process, that seems like a process of exactly that, of like shedding the shonky bits of dodgy conditioning and bringing the personality more in alignment with the truth of our being. So we're sharing something that needs to be shared or wants to be shared.
right. I love that. That really makes sense to me, because I often look at things from a creation perspective. I used to write music years ago, or I'd say I used to write music. I didn't write music. I didn't sit down and write it. I had a guitar and I had some other instruments. I had a home studio at some point. Early digital recording. I had Cubase VST. Started getting
I
early.
remember it.
Yeah. So I would start knocking tunes up.
Quantize that.
Yes, quantize that, but don't over quantize it. So to me, oftentimes the process of creating a piece of music, it would start out with an intention, right? I want to bring a piece of music into the world. Sometimes I'd have a vibe, like I want to do something like that. It was never, I didn't have the whole thing fully formed, because that's not creating. That's, I don't know, just being. And then I would start to engage. So I'd have to engage in a process. And I might pick up my guitar and I might be playing around. I'd come up with some kind of line. And then I'd go, right, okay, so what fits with that? What goes with that? And then something else would go with it. And then what does that suggest? And then a happy accident or two would happen. It'd be like, oh, actually. So this kind of organic unfolding process, which isn't micromanaged, isn't controlled. As Steve Jobs, another Steve Jobs quote puts it, you cannot connect the dots looking forward, only looking backward. After you've made the tune, you can go, well, here's what happened. And there's always these like alignments. This goes with this, right? So when you're talking about what you're talking about there, when I think about that, who you really are, I suppose I really get what you're saying about, being a part of, well, that's actually what I said, being a part of something greater, but, I really get that. And I really also like the idea that there is something unique about our particular eddy in the current of everything, There's a crazy Russian kind of manifestation guy, but he's, in my opinion, he's the best, most sophisticated manifestation guy on the planet, a guy called Vadim Zeland. Do you know his stuff at all?
Only through you telling me about it, but I haven't. I think I downloaded the audiobook or the Kindle, but haven't dove in it yet.
Good look.
700 to 800 pages.
It's a beast.
I'm saving that for a special occasion.
Yeah, I've got a lot from it, and a lot of the time, not because he's saying something like, "Wow, I've never heard anything like that before," but I've never heard it that way before. And he's got a very nice way of putting things. And he talks about us having, he calls it the soul's frail. I don't know why he uses that term frail, but it's almost like a fingerprint. Your soul is like a fingerprint or a thumbprint. It's unique to you, right? There's something unique to you. And what you're saying really resonates for me, because I think that most people are kept away from getting close to that much of the time because of fears about not fitting in with what the world says they should be doing or not doing it right. Failure. So that the fear keeps people away from really being in alignment with that very unique thing that's going to have them come alive. It's nothing to do with ego. It's not ego. It's not like, it's completely the opposite. It's when fear is unhooked And there's true freedom there to express what's, my friend William Whitecloud says, what's in your heart? He says, it's different ways of thinking about it. But I think
Well, and
that,
it's why, James, it's why courage is required. Because I don't know if fear necessarily gets unhooked for a lot of people. I think for a lot of people, they got to do it even though it's scary.
yeah,
Right? Like
yeah,
courage, if there's no fear, then it's easy to follow your heart. It's when it's scary, as it often is, because of all that conditioning and that sort of thing. That's why courage is such an essential thing. It's funny though. My buddy Garrett Kramer and I decided let's do a talk on this. Let's do a talk on courage. Do an event on courage. No one wanted an event on courage because the promise was you'll do scary stuff, even though
right.
we're like, no, we want to not be afraid. We'll
Yeah,
come
yeah,
up with
yeah.
be afraid talk, but we don't want about courage.
I've noticed this a lot of times. One of the biggest barriers that people seem to have to letting go of their fears is that they'll do the thing they fear, and that's scary. There's like a weird, it's like, yeah, but you won't be afraid anymore. But I am right now. And if I let go of the fear, I'll do it. And that would be crazy because that's a dangerous thing, or that's a risky thing, or a threatening thing, So I kind of see that a lot. I think though, I'm gonna share this point about your soul's frail, or what's in your heart, or whatever you want to call it. In any act of creation, like if you're a painter, that color goes with that color, right? Those go together. But in order to know that that color goes with that color, you have to appreciate the colors for what they really are, right? I think if people are too locked down and they're not allowing what's in their soul, what's in their heart, whatever, to come through, they can't figure out what it goes with in the world.
Mm.
And like anything that gets created by how, if we're being an individual, how we meet the world, how we meet the others, how we go with, like a piece in a music mix has got to sit in the mix. It's got to fit there. It's got to sit in the mix. It was saying recently that survival of the fittest isn't right. It's survival of the fit, not the fittest, how it fits with everything else. It's got to be a part of everything else, how it fits with. So it's not about competition. It's about actually harmony and harmonization. I think that we can't harmonize and really create if we're bending ourselves out of shape, falling for ideas that we should do this, we shouldn't do that. That's the right way to success. This business guru said, do it this way and guaranteed these results. Until we let go and allow ourselves to really connect in. Oh, I'm thinking now, a book you recommended to me some time ago called Source. I think it was called Source.
Oh yeah.
By Joseph Jarowski, is it?
Jaworski.
Yeah. That kind of way of being in the world, where you're allowing so much more and allowing the alignments and kind of allowing things to carry you through. It's about how you participate. So I think there is a real value in unhooking from all of that more narrow-minded stuff, even for the pragmatically minded who are like, well, look, you're going to get more out of life when you free yourself to be in life.
Well, and I'll take it one step further, James. So I've for a lot of my business career, I've been basically the way I've done it is I come up with the ideas, then I give it to my team or whatever to implement and that sort of thing. And I'm now working with a team. There's 4 of us, all of whom are really deep in the understanding that that I share. And so we flew to Genoa last week or the week before for a team meeting to come up with strategy. And we sat there together, and what emerged was something much bigger than any one of us would have come up with. And it was what you might call a massive transformational purpose, which resonates deeply with each of us to this day, which was to champion the wisdom, intelligence, and connection in every person. So that's what we're setting out to do. And our vision for that is about creating a protocol that people can take out and that can wake people up to this. God knows how we're going to do it. It seems like such a massive, but it's in terms of impact, if we're able to do it, it's going to make so much more of a difference than I could make just doing the things out of my own head. But what it's required of me is to let go of all things. One of my mentors, Joseph Riggio, who's also a dear, dear friend, once said to me, if you want to look at what limits someone, don't look at what works for them. Now, I don't want to look at what doesn't work. They'll be happy to let that go. If you want to look at what really limits someone, look at the stuff that works well for them. Well, what's worked well for me over the years is I dream something up, tell people what to do, they get on with it. But that's also had limitations to it. And I've got to the point in my life and my business, my work, where I want to be free of that. And that means a deeper connection and collaboration with other people, which means discovering a very, very different way of being in relation to the creative process. And that's relied on me tapping into the very things we're talking about.
I love that idea from Joseph Riggio. I've just literally recorded a short for Instagram, which borrows the title from an old Taoist expression, which is, in order to profit, you must invest in loss. Because,
great line.
Because if, what we tend to do is fall back on what works for us. And when we let go of that, there's a huge kind of risk. Well, now we're in uncharted territory. But if you're going to go beyond what you've already had and been doing, you have to let go of that. You have to go into uncharted territory. And of course, it's the stuff that's been working. That's the killer to let go of. I let that hold me back for years. I was too held on to my old hypnosis business. I was afraid that talking of business advice, I got what I thought was a genius piece of business advice years ago. And it turned out to be an albatross around my neck. It was in order to, no, it wasn't. That's what the piece I just gave. It was, be smart enough to know when you're getting lucky. Right? This business guru said this. I'm like, yeah, that's right. And I'm getting lucky right now. I've got this stuff. It's working. Just keep doing it. Don't screw it up. Don't screw it up. Don't screw it up. Oh, that killed my soul in the end, because I ended up just doing something and the whole idea is I got lucky. It had nothing to do with anything else. It was terrible. But I think, being willing to let go. And I guess that's what you did with your NLP business. You let go. You massively let go. You invested and lost in that way. So that's a huge thing.
But I felt lucky, James. I had seen something that was just such a clear direction for me. It just made sense to go in that direction. I feel very, very grateful for having realized what I've realized and, discovered what I discovered and that sort of thing. So yeah, it was with huge gratitude that I changed direction.
Right. I'm going to say this, but you might disagree strongly with what I'm about to say. Obviously, I've never gone as deep into the 3 principles as a sort of paradigm as you, but I did get a lot from it. And I still do. And it still informs often how I'm coaching people much of the time, because I deal with a lot of people. I'm working with frontline services and military veterans and these kind of things. They often come and see me when they're in a dark place. So I'm looking to free them from that as much as I can. And a lot of stuff from 3 principles comes through for me. But, to sort of tie it back to the NLP stuff and all of this, obviously a big influence on NLP, I think maybe one of the biggest influences. There's the Bateson influence, but there's the Gregory Bateson, the model, Milton Erickson, modeling of Milton Erickson. And Erickson apparently said of Bandler and Grinder, bandit and swindler really cracked the nut on my work. The trouble is they took the shell but left the nut. Okay. And I don't think
it's a very Stonian line. I don't know if he said it. No, but it sure sounds like him.
Yeah, allegedly he said it. But, I always say, don't discard that. If you look at the shell-nut complex, the shell is there to deliver the nut. It's not an unvaluable thing. But I really feel in a lot of ways, and I know the flavor is incredibly different, But I really feel that three principles and Erickson are kind of pointing at the same thing in quite different ways. Has that
I mean,
ever occurred to you?
well, here's what occurs to me in relation to that, James. I heard Erickson say in different ways and in different recordings and writings is, come meet me in the middle of nowhere. I'll
Mm.
meet you in the middle of nowhere. And so as I see it, remember Bandler once saying, I'm not trying to fix people, I'm trying to unfix them.
Mm.
And, can I share a metaphor with you?
Please. Yeah.
How it strikes my way of imagining it is when someone comes to work with me and they're stuck in some way or they don't know how to create what they want to create or whatever it might be. I how I imagine it is, you know the old saying, the map's not the territory. Well, they've got their map of the world, but it doesn't look or sound or feel to them like a map of the world. It looks like the world, right? And that I imagine that map as like a raft that they're floating down the river of life on. So my job as a coach or as change worker, whatever you want to call it, is I want to get on their raft with them and get a sense of it, understand it, and particularly important, find out where the edges are because they never go off the edges, but we know that everything they're looking for is off the edge of that raft. And so what I do is I find my way to the edge with them. And then we get there, I put an arm around their shoulder and we jump off into the water. And that's looks to me like where Erickson ended up with people. And that looks to me like the insight-friendly space of remembering who you really are that Sid Banks pointed to. There's a way in which I uh, characterize my work these days as primarily doing my best to be a mirror that allows my clients to catch a glimpse of who they really are in it.
Mm.
So that's what I do. And then when they climb back onto the raft, they discover it's different and it's new and it's fresh and it's got things in it that weren't there before and new possibilities and all that sort of thing. So I think, it seems clear to me that Erickson was leveraging and pointing to the innate capacity for resilience, creativity, realization, uh, security, peace of mind, well-being, health that's there in every human being. Like he had a knowing about the fact of that, and his certainty about that was so compelling that people would go, yeah, he must be right. You and I worked with Stephen Gilligan some months ago, and I feel the same domain in Stephen. Now he wouldn't probably describe it the same way I do, but it seems to me like that space, which the Buddhists I think refer to as the fertile void. I call it an insight-friendly space. I want to, lead my clients into an insight-friendly space so they can have the realizations and insights that are going to make a difference to them, which is really just another way of saying fresh, new perceptual reality or fresh, new raft. It's not, for me anyway, James, it's not about they get new thinking, though that emerges as well. It's about they get new reality. So I
Yeah.
want to take them into a world that they're not ordinarily inhabiting, so that something that's an innate capacity in them can provide them with fresh new reality, fresh new raft.
Right.
So
And that I think is exactly what Erickson's doing as well, taking
I
people
think so.
into
I
a,
think it's that
you
kind
know,
of thing. I mean, he's got a different way of talking about it, very interesting modes and methods for finding his way into it. But it looks like it, certainly, and Erickson's been a huge inspiration to me over the years, right? And funnily enough, a game changer for me was when I can't even. I'm ashamed to say I can't even remember who I was talking to, but they had been a student of Erickson's. And they were saying how it wasn't his language skills, and it was like he was great at language, but it wasn't that. He was great at rapport, but it wasn't that. I was like, well, what was it then? He said, this guy could get into rapport with you at the level of your identity. And he said it was like he was communicating on every single channel. I see you. I see who you are. I know who you are. And I like what I see. What I see is just fine. You don't need to change a thing. And he said that bathed in that kind of love, connection, acceptance, seeing, the people would kind of relax at an ontological level, and then they just start to transform. I heard this story. I'm like, I want to learn to do that. And that I want to learn to do that is what guided me to the principles and then led me to develop the skill set I've developed.
Right. I think there's a lot to it. Anyone who's into, decoding Erickson, I would encourage to check out 3 principles, check out your teachings, because I do think it will hugely enrich what they're doing in terms of, Erickson might call it naturalistic trance work, but, or he might talk about people, falling out of their habitual associative sets and,
Bingo,
these kind
yeah.
of things, but it's the same thing. A lot of it at its basic level, Erickson stuff is stop controlling and start allowing, because good things want to come through,
Mm.
and I'm not saying there wasn't more to it than that. He was a rascal and a trickster and enjoyed all of that side of things too. But I do think that underneath of it, that's very much there. And for me, that is a game changer in life, when you can start allowing and being aware of what wants to come through, allowing it to come through, allowing things to connect that want to connect. To me,
And
that's
it's
ultimately.
It's there. It's because I know for people listening, they might go, "Oh, I wish I had that. I wish I had something that wanted to come through." But it's there in everyone. You just got to decide that it's a priority.
Right. And also, I think, I don't know if it was you I heard this metaphor from, or Michael Neal, might have been both, of the sort of brass band making a lot of noise, and there being something underneath to hear, a gentle chime underneath. And it's not easy to hear that when the brass band is trumpeting away about, you should do this, you need to do that, you need to up your income, you need to take it to the next level, you need to, whatever it is, honking away. I think listening and hearing that, Vadim Zealand talks about hearing the rustle of the morning stars. That's his little bit of poetry of it. Let everything quieten down so you can hear the rustle of the morning stars. So that's super cool. Jamie, is there anything that you want to, I'm looking at the time, your alarm's going to go off very shortly. Is there anything you want to say or add, or let people know where they can find you, anything like that?
I mean, the only thing I'd add, which is really just to underline all of this, that it seems to me, and it's my opinion, that the 2 most valuable things a person can discover are how experience is created and who they really are. And one of the things I love about the principles is it does create a path for discovering both those things, and a relatively straightforward way of discovering those things. And what I see again and again and again is, once people discover that, it's kind of a game changer, or it can be. It's, for some people it happens quite dramatically, and for other people it's kind of slowly and gradually, but it makes a difference. The people can find me in the usual places, jamiesmart.com, podcasts. I've got the Get Clarity podcast and the Thriving Coaches podcast. My books are on Amazon, Clarity and Results, and the little books of both. And Facebook's always a good place as well.
Fantastic. Jamie, I appreciate you being here. Really great to have you on here. I really appreciate you making the time, and I look forward.
Oh, I appreciate you inviting me on, James. It's great to see you again. And I just really enjoy our conversation. So thanks for having me on, and thanks for what you're doing as well.
Thank you. Okay, Jamie, cheers. We'll tag that. And I know you've got to run. Really good to see you. I hope we get to catch up at some point in the not too distant.
I'd like that. You're in Scotland still?
I'm in Edinburgh. Yeah. At the moment, I'm doing 1 week a month down in London, because I'm just working with the Metro.
Thanks for your attention. I look forward to seeing you soon.